Hey everybody, Dave Whitmarsh here today, talking assessments with Joel Quintela, who's CEO founder of a company that he's named after himself, Quintela Inc. So
Yeah.
I always I always have fun having conversations with PhDs that are I was psychologists.
Big egos.
They're they're a different breed, and Joel will be the first to admit it. So we're going to today we're going to talk about assessments, managing different volumes of assessments, what to expect, starting with hiring, or actual we're pretty much focusing on hiring, and then we're going to jump into a look and demo of how you manage when you have multiple providers that somehow you may have inherited. So thanks for coming on, Joel.
Thank you, David. Hi, everybody. Like David was saying, my name is Joel Quintela. I am an IO psychologist, industrial organizational ecologist, although I have a love-hate relationship with my field, in big part because we're really focused on the process that companies have to go through with assessments. So the power of the assessment itself is not the assessment, it's in how you use it. That means you have to be very careful on what that process looks like. So how are you administering all these assessments to your candidates or development folks? That's what we're going to focus on. So everything I say is going to be around what we call process validity. It doesn't matter how good your assessments are. If your process is terrible, then your validity goes down.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so about you a bit, how long have you been in the space? And
I've been an IO psychologist for about 25 years or so. I started my company 13 years ago because we did notice that all of our clients were using a whole bunch of different assessments from a whole different publishers, and they were going through a crazy mess to administer those assessments, whether it's selection, development, performance management, all the talent management initiatives. So we started the company to help our clients streamline their assessment process. So if you're talking about one assessment from one publisher, that's really easy. If you're talking about 5 assessments from 5 different publishers, that process gets pretty complex.
cool.
So we built the company to streamline that assessment process. The other core competency is interview guide systems. Okay.
And that's awesome. Okay. And so we're just going to jump off camera. So Joel can share screen and we'll just talk about some of the issues that are some of the problems that you talked about. So, okay, so I got your screen perfectly. So give us a rundown what we're seeing here, Joel.
So I wanted to start off by talking about the way we look at assessments, and that's for all initiatives within a company, whether it's selection or development or engagement. All assessments have to follow a very specific path. It's all assessments. And first thing, you have to administer the assessments themselves. Somebody has to track what's happening with those assessments. And then somebody has to review or send some sort of result. So how do you administer? How do you track what's happening? How do you use the information out of those assessments? So everything we try to do is simplify the whole concept. So this may look a little bit different than what you may have seen with publishers, mainly because we're content agnostic. I don't really care what the assessments are because you got a lot of good ones and some that are not so good. For us, we just focus on the process itself, and the way we break it down is when you're doing assessments within a company, it doesn't matter what the initiative is. There are really 3 strategies, and they're based on the number or the volume of the assessments. And everybody knows at the bottom you see high volume. So most of what you see is about high volume. assessments, whether they're assessments, video, or whatever it is, those high volume tend to be integrated into an ATS. So when we talk about assessments that you're using and the kinds of reports that you're using, you're typically just using one assessment. It's probably 30 minutes long, maybe, and you don't actually have a report. It's probably a score.
So simple, automated, easy to look at. You get your data, and what would you get from that? Like a couple page or 1 page number?
Yeah, for the high volumes, you're just going to have a number, red, green, yellow, pass, no pass, and that's going to be passed over to the ATS so that talent acquisition can see that. But it's just typically one score. Maybe it's automated, pass, fail, but that's pretty simple. And the other piece is the user experience, and this is where I want to focus a little bit more time on. But everybody focuses on this, right? All articles, webinars, whatever you're reading is focused on making this candidate experience great. And I think a lot of companies have succeeded in doing that. But there are two other groups of assessment volume that nobody really talks about very much, especially the high, this top one. But let me finish this one. So medium for us just means director level, VP level. What's interesting when you're administering this assessments, some of those are going to go through an ATS, but a lot of them are not going to go ATS. So you have to take care of them somewhere else, not in the ATS. So when you're talking about assessments for this particular volume, director VPs, you're typically going to have several assessments. And it might be 1 or 2 different assessments, and maybe it's from different publishers. And then the report itself is going to be very short as well, maybe 2 or 3 pages.
And like you say, so that's midline, and still fairly easy to manage, though.
It is, except for the ones that are not in the ATS, because somebody has to manage all of that process. And the volume is higher, so it's a bit of an issue. So on the other side, the user experience is what I really want to talk about, because nobody talks about user experience for these categories. Maybe for medium, and then so that user experience depends on whether it's integrated in ATS or somebody has to administer all those assessments offline somewhere.
And the user experience really is the candidate experience. Yeah.
Well, the reason we put users on that phrase is because there are a number of different people that are involved in this specific process.
Yeah.
The candidate or participant is just one of them. The other one is the talent acquisition professionals, leadership development professionals. Somebody on the company end has to send these assessments out. We're talking about 3 steps. Somebody has to administer all those assessments. Somebody has to track what's happening, Excel spreadsheets, wherever. And then somebody has to send out all of those assessments.
Got it. Yeah.
So on this the low volume, which we mean is high touch. So these are executives. And for them, we tend to give more assessments, and it might be 5 or 6 from 3 different publishers, because the price of a bad hire for an executive is pretty high. So we want to know, we have a pretty good idea who we should like and who we should not select. Now, the reports themselves, those tend to be pretty long as well, and they can be 10 to 15 different pages. Maybe your consultant is creating this, but it's a list of competencies. Somebody's saying these are positive, these are negative for that individual, and then probably some summary narrative around each of those competencies. So that tends to be pretty long. But you are administering a number of different assessments, and they can be psychometric assessments or case studies or role plays, but you have a number of assessments. Maybe they take 5 hours or so. So when you have many assessments, and I mentioned using one assessment is pretty simple, but once you start adding different assessments from different publishers, that administration gets to be a crazy mess. So the one user we're talking about, which is on the company side, somebody actually has to create an email that they're going to send to the candidate or participant that tells the participant, how are you going to take each of these, let's say 5 assessments? And those emails tend to be pretty crazy because you have one, log into this, use this URL, and then use this username and password. And then when you finish that assessment, come back to this email, click on this other URL, enter this other login. When you finish that, come back and do that 5 times.
Yeah, that just doesn't seem like a very good process at all when you lay it out that way, right? Especially when you're trying to recruit the most senior folk for your organization, and you're sending them 5 different places all over the map. It seems like a nightmare, and I'm sure there's many cases where people just don't even do them all, right? So,
Yeah.
You'd have to track them down and say you didn't finish this one, right?
That's correct. So from the administrator, so the company, it's a crazy mess, and really where nobody talks about this piece of it, like David's talking about, is the candidate user experience, and these are executive level candidates, and arguably the most important hires within a company, but nobody focuses on these. Everybody seems to be okay with sending out these crazy emails and making these executives jump through hoops to complete all of the assessments they need to complete. So that experience on both ends, administration and the candidate, is terrible.
Yeah, that's a given.
Well, it's a given, except that most companies don't do anything about it, right? So most of our clients were using a whole bunch of different assessments from publishers, and that's because they've identified which assessments are best for each of those purposes. But then we punish them by having to go to 5 or so different platforms, not only to administer, but even on the reporting side. You may or not get an email that says, hey, this assessment's been completed. Now go back to the site, download the report, and you have to do that 5 times.
Wow.
So the other piece, not only are they having to jump through hoops, and again, these are executive level candidates, and you're already making them go through this terrible experience, and that's a bad impression at this level. Yep.
Yeah, that totally is. And so we're going to eventually, or very soon, we're going to talk and show you how or what Joel's created that helps folks with that. But I do have sort of a question, just out of the gate. So what percentage of companies, or I don't want to put a percentage on it, but because I don't know if that's in the market, but how
Yeah.
many companies actually use this data for development? Because you put these people through, at the high level, 30 minutes, at the low level, upwards of 5 hours. Do companies take this and then use this data for future development, for continuous learning purposes?
Well, there are actually 2 ways you might be able to use that information. The first one is onboarding. So it's a similar issue. You're gathering a lot of information through that hiring process. There's assessments, interviews, whatever it is. That's pretty valuable information you can use to help somebody go from 0 to 100 as quickly as possible. Now, companies are starting to wake up a little bit and realize that there is a lot of value in using these assessments to try to help somebody on board, or even the manager help. And then, like you're mentioning, on the development side, talent acquisition and development tend not to talk at all, because development is using 360s and maybe slightly other different assessments than talent acquisition is. But more importantly, when you're using all of these assessments from these multiple publishers, the only way you can use that information is to aggregate it somehow. So you can tell each publisher to give you an Excel spreadsheet with all the scores, and then somebody has to merge those spreadsheets with no unique identifiers. So that really does contribute to why a lot of people don't use these assessments and use that information, because it just exists in a lot of different places. And to really use it, you have to aggregate it somehow.
Right.
That doesn't
Yeah.
happen.
No. Okay. So let's I'll let you jump into the product a bit, and so it's common that large organizations inherit multiple assessments, or platforms or strategies, and without making you sound like that character on Forrest Gump that talks about different ways you can cook shrimp, right? How might some of these things have happened, right? Mergers and acquisitions, just different philosophies, how else do they find, that they might have, a handful of providers?
Yeah, and if you were to poll 1,000 organizations, most of them are going to be doing 360s.
Mm.
And they may be doing some of other psychometric assessments, or maybe the DISC, or maybe the Myers-Briggs, or other more powerful assessments. But all of those talent acquisition initiatives, hiring, even profiling, 360s, development and performance appraisal, all of those initiatives have some sort of an assessment process. But the way it exists now is those different groups are not talking to each other. So nobody really knows who's using what assessments, because it's all decentralized. And you just don't know what's happening in development if you're talent acquisition, right? So there's
companies are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they haven't figured out a way to aggregate, whatever they can from it.
correct. Now they can. It just takes them a long time to do that, because in order to do that, they have to get the data from those publishers. And you may or may not get charged for getting that data, but when they give it to you, you're going to have to somehow merge all of those 5 different spreadsheets, and they're going to come in different formats. They're not going to have a unique identifier, even if it's email, for example. So that is a crazy mess trying to do that. That takes forever.
Okay. And okay, so run us through a scenario here of what you got.
Okay. So what you're seeing now is what we call a candidate dashboard. It's really an assessment management dashboard. And it goes back to that process that I was talking about, which is any assessment, whatever is being used, 360s, whatever it is, has to follow these 3 steps. You have to administer it, like we were talking about before, and that means somebody has to send it, and then the candidate has to actually get to that information. And then let's say you have 20 or 200 high potentials, and you're giving them 5 different assessments. You now have 1,000 different assessments that somebody has to track. So once you administer these 1,000 different assessments, after week 1, somebody needs to be able to tell who started out of those 200, who hasn't started, who's completed what, and then somebody has to move all of those 200 individuals through that entire process. So tracking. The third piece is the reporting piece. So depending on the volume, you are going to have some sort of report, whether it's a one report scores, short score, But somebody needs to be able to get those reports very quickly, excuse me, and or send them out to the development leader, let's say. So how do you administer? How do you track what's happening? And how do you use the information results? That's why we built this dashboard. It allows our clients to do those three things very quickly. And like I mentioned before, if you're using one assessment from one publisher, that's a really easy process. But once you start using 5 assessments from 200 high potentials, that is a nightmare, and it's a huge headache. And I'm always fascinated how tolerant our clients were before we got involved. They're using 20 different steps. Somebody's doing 20 different steps to try to even just send this email out to those 200 individuals. And I'm just fascinated at how we're tolerant of that, and then how we're okay with letting our executive candidates go through that mess.
Wow.
So on the first side, the beginning side, how do you make this as easy as possible? And you have a little button over here that says add a participant. So this is the administration side. So you, from the organization side, the professionals, contractors, they're the ones that have to send this information out. We wanted to streamline how they do that. So what you see here are just some standard fields. We customize these, but these are the standard fields that our clients tend to want to gather when they're sending out these assessments.
Mm-hmm.
What we wanted to do as well is, as IO psychologists, we're, especially publishers, no offense, are very enamored by their own assessments. So they would prefer that you as a company are using that name of that particular assessment. And for me, again, I think it's the use of the assessment. So what we prefer to do is to allow the company behind the scenes to actually create different packages that they don't have to know or care about which assessments are in this package of assessments. All they need to know is what that assessment package is called. So enter your email, enter your first name, last name, and then use a drop down to select high potential assessment battery, let's say. And that could consist of 3 assessments from 3 different publishers. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, so Joel, so the next step, so once they choose that, what does the candidate receive?
So
or did I speak too early on this?
Yeah. So, well, let me do this, and then I'll get to that. But so from the candidate side, they're going to get one email with one link to what we would call a candidate dashboard.
Oh, okay.
And it looks something like this. So whenever they click the one link, they come to this portal where they know exactly which assessments they have to take. Again, these are configurable. Sometimes clients want to let their candidates know how long it is going to be. This is where they start. This is where they complete. But they don't have to go through different logins and different passwords, or even perhaps more important is that when there's an issue with that assessment, that happens quite a bit. That executive knows that they can just use one email, and in this case, it's contact us, and we're the ones that could troubleshoot. We'll know which assessment it is. We'll know what the problem is. If there's an issue, we know to go to the publisher and find out what it is. The candidate doesn't have to worry about it. Something goes wrong, go to this email, we'll fix it. Okay.
Right. So rather than having to go back to the recruiter, who then has to go back to the provider or figure out which one it
Yeah.
is, then go back to the provider, it's just all in one. So nice bundle. Yep.
Yeah, and those tend to be the support calls, of course, are divided into two big categories. One is more of a I forgot my password, or I clicked the link and it didn't work. The other one's more of there's an actual technical issue and there was an error. So we handle those two things. So the company doesn't have to handle it. Canada just come to us and say, hey, I had a problem with this assessment, and we'll fix that for them.
Cool. That's awesome. Okay. So then the next step is what?
So that's on the administration side. Make it as easy as possible to send out 5 assessments for 200 individuals. Make it as easy as possible for executive or your leader to actually take those 5 assessments on the admin side. So how do we streamline that? Mm-hmm. And again, it's one link, enter first name, last name, send a link in an email. Candidate side, look at the email, click one link, they go to their dashboard. So the next step that I was mentioning is this important part where somebody has to track where each of those 200 individuals are with their 5 assessments. So we built the platform and this dashboard so that our clients can quickly go through the list of the participants and know exactly what's happening with that individual. So in this case, haven't started, page in this case is in progress somewhere, so that now we know, okay, I need to nudge Luke and Paige and others so that they can actually get started because they have 5 assessments and maybe there's a 2-week deadline. Our clients need to know that very quickly. Yeah. And this dashboard, the purpose is to see what's happening, to understand what's happening, and then also to move people through the pipeline. So you can actually tell the system, hey, look, send all reminders to each of those participants. And for them, if they've taken 1 assessment, the reminder is going to say, hey, you took the 1 assessment. That's great. You have 4 more.
Yeah, I can't imagine how much time that would save.
It's a lot of time. And what we do initially is essentially ask the client to write down their current process. And we're doing that so that we know which steps we can remove from that process or somehow speed up the process or making it a bit more user-friendly for both users. So we tend to come in there, the process steps, and we come in and say, okay, this page is 1 button. That's it. Initially, excuse me. Initially, our clients don't believe us, I guess. Right? It's too good to be
Which
true.
is a nice problem to
have. You're saying that I just have to enter first name, last name, and email, pick a battery, and that's it? That's all I have to do? And then on the candidate side, they just have to click a link and go through it. They look at me, they don't believe it. And then we set it up for them, and they go, wow, you did it. And it's incredible how much time I've saved on the process validity so that I can now focus on the real value is using those assessments. But most of our clients are 80% administration and 20% using the assessments because it's a crazy mess. Mm-hmm. So from the tracking perspective, I mentioned you have 200 high potentials. Our clients are able to dig in a little deeper. And this is for Tiffany. This is where we had 3 assessments for this particular battery. So our clients can actually go through and say, well, they started, but where are they in the process? And then so I think these are 2 publishers. When they complete each assessment, then our clients can just go here to download that report. They don't have to go to the vendor. They don't have to get an email that says, hey, it's ready, go download the report. They just know that it exists, and now it's in their report.
Cool. That's super awesome. That's just such a huge time saver.
Yeah, it's a big time saver. And again, I do have a love-hate relationship with my professional organization, is because if you're an IO, you tend to complicate everything. And no matter what it is, whatever we touch, we just overcomplicate for whatever reason. And that's so different from all the vendors, because they're built by IOs. I'm not a very patient person in general, so I'm concerned with the number of clicks it takes our clients and their leaders, their participants, to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
Take the assessments. I don't care which publisher. I don't actually care what the name of the assessment is. I don't necessarily care what the scores are or the reports. I need to get them those things very quickly. Administer, track what's happening, get the reports.
Yeah. Now, having said all that, you do have an opinion on if they do want to ask you what they should be using, you can certainly guide them in that too. So.
Exactly. So part of that streamlining and minimizing clicks is that there is a power per minute on your assessments, and there's a point of diminishing returns. So if you're using 5 assessments or 6 assessments, it's possible that you only need 3 of those, and the others are just you're not actually getting additional information. So because we are IOs, we do have clients on that side. What are the assessments you should be using? And again, we're content agnostic, so we have a pretty good sense of which assessments are good with which for which purpose.
Okay. And so, what else is there? Anything else I can show this? Because I'm just dying to see how the data is aggregated. So that to me is the fascinating part that I can't even begin to imagine what that could be like.
Exactly. So when we talk about that third step, so administer, number 1, track, number 2, and reporting, number 3, those results come in different versions. It could be a document, like a PDF. It could be some sort of online report, or it could be data. Document, PDF, maybe some sort of online interactive report of some sort, and then there's all the data on the back end. All of those are just different parts of different kinds of reports. So part of what we do, in addition to the other things we're talking about, is we do aggregate all of that information for clients. So it doesn't necessarily matter what publishers they are. We get that information from the publisher, and then we put it into one spreadsheet. And our clients just have to pick export candidates, and they pick a date. They get a large Excel spreadsheet with all of the data aggregated. So those 200 or however many scores from those 5 assessments, we just put them all into one field or one row, let's say, for a candidate, so that our clients don't have to do that, and they can just go directly into analyzing that information or just using that information in some form.
Cool. Do we get to see one or?
I don't have one that I can show.
Oh, bummer! I waited all this time. Okay, webcast is over.
Yeah. Well, I should have explained. So those exports tend to be custom, and in fact, these dashboards tend to be custom as well. We don't want to force fit your process into our process. I just know you have to administer, track, and report. I'm going to work with you to figure out what that looks like. And we pretty much know what clients are going to want. So we're a bit more configuration than customization. Now, one of those is that export file. So part of the setup is to go through with the client and actually help them determine what the fields in that spreadsheet should be.
Got it. Yeah.
Is-
So they don't have to interpret the data. You effectively give it to them as they want it interpreted.
Correct. And especially
Yeah, that's nice.
especially these days, data analyst it's huge, but that requires that you actually have that information, that data, and it has to be pretty clean. We know our clients need to do that, so we just made it a lot easier for them to do it. And the reason we have to work with clients to decide what fields to include in that spreadsheet is because it's not unusual for a publisher or a vendor to have 100 different scores for that one assessment.
Right.
And we don't need 100. Clients don't need 100. They just need the 10 or the 20. Now, we have that of the other 100 behind the scenes if you ever want it. But in terms of that export, we want to be as concise and efficient. So we just work with clients to figure out because what exactly, which scores do you want for each of these?
So that makes total sense. So I don't imagine, so what's some of the feedback as far as time, ROI, that you're getting from your clients on this? Like what are they talking about? What are they saying?
Well, most of it's anecdotal, but they're, like I mentioned before, they don't believe that we can do this in the way we said we can do it, in the amount of time and headache we were saying that we can do. And then when they see it, they're pretty amazed at how we streamline this process. And I suppose a good indication of how happy they are is that we start getting different projects within the organization to streamline those other projects. And part of it is I mentioned that there are different assessments for different initiatives. So this dashboard that you see here allows the client to administer whichever assessment batteries for whatever purpose in this one dashboard. So I mentioned, in this case, Tiffany was taking these assessments. Karen is taking different assessments. So the system doesn't care, but allows our clients to centralize and, more importantly, control and get some sort of line of sight on who's using what assessments and how. The way we do it is allow clients to put everything here. Administer all your assessments, no matter where it is, no matter which assessments, how many assessments, what your reports are, in one place.
That's sweet.
So these look like candidates from the same development process or selection process, but they all have different assessments.
Yeah, so I was just thinking, like, how much time, if you're a major retailer or like this is like a number of employees times, a month that you would just bypass. Right? It's crazy. I can understand how people would question whether it's possible. And so do you have any problems? I'm assuming that you just API into a lot of the assessment companies, or do you have any issues with whatever people bring to their table as far as this is what we use? Like, is there stuff you can't do, or are you pretty much open to anything?
There are issues, and they're going to be similar to what a client is dealing with already. So if they have 5 publishers that they want to use for most of their projects, they do have to interact and essentially are at the mercy of that vendor. And every vendor has their own personality, their own process, their own support. We have to deal with the same issue when we get involved, and it's not unusual for, let's say, those 5 vendors. We might have some sort of connection, and it doesn't have to be real time. It could be batch or some other way with a couple of those, but the other 3 we don't, and they may be obscure because every client has 1 or 2 or 3 vendors that they've known from past, or they're not as well known. And in those cases, we just go to those publishers and say, look, we want to streamline this for our client. Can we integrate, or can you pass this information back and forth?
Got it.
But it's tricky when you're working with vendors.
Well, there's so many out there, right? And some of them are mom and pop shops and all sorts of things. So yeah, I could see that as they just may not have the technology, know how to make it super easy. But all the major guys, it sounds like that's not a problem, right?
Well, it is actually because they, especially the IO firms and the psychology firms, they're just now updating their platforms just over the last 10 years or so. So they look nicer, but the process is still the same. So there's still 10 steps to go get a report. And they are psychology companies, and their core competency isn't technology. So when we get involved, it's a bit of us helping the different technologies kind of come together, because they're all talking about the same thing in different ways. Our client is talking about the same thing in different ways. We just help them translate what that is. But it's just a recent thing that IO firms are now creating, I guess, better technology, but they still aren't technology firms. They're still integrating with them, passing information back and forth. It's still new for some of those vendors.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the honesty. I gave you what I thought was a lob ball that you could say, oh yeah, all the big ones are okay, but
No, they're not.
But hey man, you're as honest as it gets. And one of the problems that I see with some of those in the IO firms that are, or the ones that are backed by IO firms is they think that their methodology is the best, right? And so not that they dismiss other things, other products, but they like, ours is better and this is why, and everybody needs to be on it. But the reality is that you're not going to go changing contracts or your situation or your old data to accommodate their wishes. So you need to have something that can make sense of it all together, right?
Yeah, and like you're mentioning, I don't know how many assessment companies there are now, and I can't even keep up with them. And a lot of them are not IO psychologists or coming at all from that psychometric background. They're companies that may be heavily funded, coming from Silicon Valley, doing the same thing that we're doing. They have their technology is much better. Their marketing, the way they present the value is just a lot better than what IOs do. But the companies don't necessarily know of those other companies, or sometimes they do need some assistance to weed through those 2,000 different assessment vendors that are out there at the moment. And David, like you were saying, is we do notice that all vendors, all publishers, and they have to say this. They have to say that their assessments are the best on the market.
Yeah.
Even though they may look the same to the naked eye, they have to say this is the best thing since sliced bread. And oh, by the way, you can use us for everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that doesn't work. So there's this, one-stop shop perspective that publishers are trying to do, but the reality is, like you're talking about, every assessment is good for a specific purpose and not for other purposes.
Yeah.
It could be just the experience itself, and that candidates have to go through the report they go through, the value that they're going to get from that information, the price, the time it takes to do all that stuff. Those all differ, and for each one of your purposes, there's just a better assessment battery or process that you could use. And it's not rocket science, but there are some tried and true, or some high level, high quality assessments, and then you have medium, and then you have sort of low quality assessments. But in either case, our clients are they're going to have their own favorite assessments.
Yeah.
From a number of different publishers. There's a usual suspects, obviously, but now that we're seeing some of the other publishers that are coming up with their own thing, because there is a fatigue, and this is maybe too out of the conversation, but there is a fatigue that we're noticing with some of the big vendors, right? And most of them are sort of defaults. But now we have a whole group of other players coming into play. What we try to do is try to help clients notice and see those and try them out, and see if they might be better for that purpose.
Yeah. Well, that would probably be worthy of another conversation.
Yeah. We're seeing some really cool stuff on the assessment side, and it's not necessarily the experience or whatever, but just in terms of the amount of value that you get from certain things, the experience itself, obviously, but the time to take the assessment, the price themselves, per claim versus some sort of annual fee.
Let's book it next month. We can talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you wanted to wrap up in your dashboard? Like, or what about, what size of companies typically do you service or find the most need for this? How do you know when you're the right candidate for what you've got here?
Well, the value that we create and the amount of headache that we reduce tends to be higher with large companies, because they are using a number of different assessments for a number of different initiatives, whether it's development, selection, performance management, whatever it is. They tend to use a lot of different assessments from a lot of different publishers. So the pain that they're going through is pretty huge. So our solution is a big time saver for them, just in general, but a headache, from all users. But because I mentioned before that assessments are now, psychometric assessments are now becoming more mainstream, you are noticing that even down to the Fortune 5,000 SMBs, mid-level, they're all starting to use assessments for one reason or another. And in that case, they probably need a bit more IO consulting, I guess, but
Got it.
It's now becoming mainstream. So a lot of different companies are using these assessments, and especially now that people analytics is a huge component. Now, assessments are a perfect data point to increase your quality of hire or development.
Totally.
Short answer is it doesn't matter. If you're using assessments, and especially if you're using more assessments, there's a way to do that.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so if you're watching this, there'll be a way that you can get a hold of Joel and ask him some questions. Be prepared. He'll talk your ear off and give you a ton of information. But I can promise you that you'll enjoy the conversation. All right. Thanks very much, Joel.
Thank you.
And let's do the trends next month. I'm always interested in hearing what you're talking about, and you're very insightful and fun to listen to.
Well, let's see if I get in trouble with some of the publishers.
All right.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Joel. Bye now.